I've never been the kind of woman to complain about life. I've worked since I was a girl, and I learned early on that anything that comes easy leaves just as fast. I always believed a mother's greatest treasure, the love of her children, was something no one could ever take away. But that Sunday, on Mother's Day, I learned that even a mother's heart can be betrayed. I woke up early, as always. I made the coffee the way my son liked it, strong, brewed through a cloth filter, that smell filling the entire house. I baked cornbread, set the table with flowers from my garden. I wanted the day to be beautiful. I wanted him to remember when he was little and used to bring me flowers he'd borrowed from the neighbor's yard, grinning with that little gap where his front tooth was missing. But life changes, and sometimes it isn't time that changes its people. He showed up close to noon, with his wife beside him. She walked in first high heels, expensive perfume, her phone pointed at everything like she was filming a commercial. "Happy Mother's Day, Mrs. Nora," she said with that rehearsed smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you, dear." "God bless you," I replied politely. But deep down, I already felt it, something was different. My son came right after, carrying 2 gift bags, one large and shiny, the other small and nearly crushed. My heart sped up. Mothers are foolish, aren't we? We believe gifts are about love, not price. But his eyes didn't lie. There was distance there, a coldness I'd never seen before. He sat down, placed the larger gift on his mother-in-law's lap. "Mrs. Varon said proudly, 'Mom, Vera, this is for you. A small thank you for everything you've done for us.'" She smiled in that exaggerated way of hers, pretending to be surprised. When she unwrapped it, the gold shimmer nearly blinded me, a luxury watch, gleaming, as if screaming its worth in every reflection. Then he turned to me. "And for you, Mom." He handed me the smaller bag. Inside was a cheap mug, with crooked letters that read, "Best Mom in the World." The silence was sharp enough to cut through the air. Mrs. Vera laughed a thin, fake laugh that grated on my ears, and my daughter-in-law lifted her phone. "Oh my God, this is going viral. The rich mom gets the watch, and the simple mom gets the sentimental mug. Ha ha ha." She kept recording. I asked her to stop. I asked gently. But they laughed harder. They laughed at me. That moment burned into me like a scar. I felt humiliated, ridiculed, useless, and the worst part, the video went viral. "Look at the poor mom's face." The comments said, "She must have been a bad mother to deserve just a mug." I read every word. Every single one felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Every woman carries a scar that time could not erase, but that taught her how to live better. If you've ever stitched your own pain in silence, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a hug for those who once had to pretend they were okay. In the days that followed, I barely left the house. The neighbors whispered. The man at the bakery looked at me with pity. My son didn't call. And my daughter-in-law, she loved the attention. She kept posting stories online, laughing, talking about modern values and real mothers, as if I were some relic from another time. But one afternoon, sitting alone with that cracked mug in my hands, I remembered something they had forgotten. The warehouse where my son built his business was still in my name. It was like a light switched on inside me. That humiliation burned, yes, but it also gave me strength. They had laughed at me, but I still held something they wanted. And right then, I made myself a promise. No one was ever going to laugh at Nora Brooks again. I dug out the old keys to the warehouse. The next day, I drove there. The place was abandoned, dusty, full of old boxers and bitter memories. But when the sunlight slipped through a broken window and lit the golden dust floating in the air, I saw more than a warehouse. I saw a chance to start over. I didn't know what I was going to do, yet only that, for the first time in a long while, the fire inside me wasn't sadness. It was anger turned into will. A fierce, burning will to prove I was still alive. And I would do it. Even if I had to do it alone. Even if no one believed in me. Even if my own son called me crazy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scene from Mother's Day kept replaying in my head like a cruel movie stuck on repeat. Their laughter echoed inside me, and my heart throbbed with grief and disbelief. But mixed with the pain came a stubborn memory, one small detail they had forgotten. That document tucked deep inside a drawer, my name printed clearly across it, bold and undeniable. Owner, the warehouse. The same warehouse I bought with my retirement money when my son decided to start his own business. At the time, he said, "Mom, it's just to get things started." I'll transfer it to my name later, I promise. And I, foolish with love, believed him, but he never transferred it. And now, he'd completely forgotten that the ground he walked on was still mine. The next morning, I gathered my courage. I put on simple clothes, tied my hair back, and walked to the county records office. The young woman at the counter barely looked at me until I slid the paper toward her. She read it, raised her eyes, and said, "Yes, Mrs. Brooks, the property is still under your name. No changes." In that instant, something inside me straightened. It felt as if I'd spent a lifetime bent under the weight of guilt and fear of disappointing others, and suddenly remembered I still had a spine. I walked out of that office with the document in my purse, my hands trembling but my chest full. The wind brushed against my face as if whispering, "It's your turn now." I stopped by the warehouse. The doors were rusted, the old lock stiff with time. I pulled hard, and it gave way. The smell of mildew hit me, thick and heavy. Mixed with memories of the day I helped paint the walls, of the time I brought lunch for his team. Now there was nothing left but dust and silence. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty space, and I thought, they think they broke me, but this is where I'll rise again. In the days that followed, I began to clean the place alone. I swept, cleared out debris, washed the windows. Every bucket of water felt like washing away the pain. Every wall I scrubbed lifted another weight off my heart. Neighbors walked by and asked, "Mrs. Brooks, are you renting it out?" And I'd say, "I'm not sure yet. Maybe I'll start something of my own." They laughed, not believing a word, but I didn't care. Something inside me had already changed. Then, one afternoon, while I was cleaning, I heard a car horn outside. It was him, my son. He stepped out of the car furious. "Mom, what's going on? What's this story about you messing with the warehouse?" I wiped my hands on my apron and looked him straight in the eye. "The warehouse is mine, son. I'm just taking care of what belongs to me." He laughed, nervous, mocking. "Mom, don't complicate things. The company's under my mother-in-law's name, but that space is essential. You know that." I took a deep breath. I also know I was humiliated in front of everyone. Now I'm going to use what's mine for something that truly has value. He went silent for a few seconds, then exploded. "You're doing this for revenge, aren't you? You're still mad about that joke." Joke. The word hit me like a slap. "If that was a joke," I said quietly, "then this is my answer." I pulled the document from my purse and showed it to him. "See this paper? It says who owns this place, and it's the same woman you laughed at in that video." He stammered, tried to argue, talked about investments, about business, about family, but I wasn't listening anymore. For the first time, I was the one setting the tone. For the first time, he was the one in silence. When he finally left, I felt light. My legs were trembling, but it wasn't fear, it was relief. I knew a storm was coming, but this time, I wasn't going to hide. That night, I called an old friend, Janet, who taught sewing classes at a local community center. I told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, "Nora, you've always had magic in your hands. Why not turn that warehouse into a sewing studio? Teach the women in your neighborhood, the ones who never got a chance." The idea hit me hard. I went silent for a moment, my heart racing. A studio, a place to turn pain into creation, a space to start over, not alone, but lifting others up with me. And right then, I knew that was it. I was going to rebuild that warehouse. And where a business once stood built on greed and ingratitude, there would rise a place of hope, learning, and women's strength. Of course, my son and his wife wouldn't let it go easily. And what came next was even worse. The next day after that argument, the sky woke heavy. Dark clouds, a cold wind. It felt like even the weather knew something big was about to happen. I was in the warehouse, sweeping the floor, when I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window. It was him again. And this time he wasn't alone. My daughter-in-law stepped out first, sunglasses on, and an arrogant expression, like a woman who's come to settle a business matter. Behind her was a man in a suit, a lawyer, by the looks of him. They walked in without knocking. "Mrs. Brooks," she began, in that fake, patronizing tone she used whenever she thought she was speaking to a child. "We're here to avoid a misunderstanding. The space has been used by the company for years, and we have documents proving investment in the premises. So it would be fairer if you sold the warehouse to us, you understand." I took a deep breath and gripped the broom handle like it was an invisible weapon. "Fair?" I asked. Fair would be you showing me some respect, but since you don't know what that is, you'll learn now. My son tried to step in. Mom, please, don't make this difficult. You know how essential that space is to us. I can pay you a token amount and a token amount. I cut him off. After you exposed me to the whole country, you come offering alms. My daughter-in-law laughed, sneering. Oh, come on, Nora, you're taking it too personally. The video was just a joke. The internet forgets fast. If only she knew. The internet might forget, but a betrayed mother's heart never does. I haven't forgotten, and I won't sell. This warehouse is mine, and now it's going to become a studio. A real place, with purpose, something you all seem to have lost a long time ago. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks, you may be getting yourself into legal trouble. There are contractual clauses for commercial use. I slammed my hand on the workbench. The sound echoed through the empty space. You're standing in front of the owner of this property, and this owner has already decided. Leave. They froze for a few seconds. My son looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't, because in that moment I wasn't the same woman he'd always known. When they left, the silence that remained was heavy but good. It was the silence of someone who knows she picked a fight and is willing to see it through. In the days that followed, I started the renovation. With the little I had saved, I hired a local builder, Mr. Josu, a simple, honest man. With every strike of the hammer, I felt a piece of myself being rebuilt along with the walls. But the calm didn't last long. One day I arrived and found the materials scattered across the floor, the door forced open, paint splattered on the walls. On the outer wall, someone had sprayed in red paint. Bitter old woman. My blood ran cold. It was obvious who had done it. That kind of cruelty comes from people who can't stand to see someone else rise. I stood there staring at that word, bitter. They wanted me to feel small again, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I grabbed a scrub brush, soap, and started to clean. By myself, crying, but cleaning. With each stroke I whispered, I am not bitter. I am just someone who wants justice. And one day, you will respect me. That night I got a call. It was him. Mom, you're making yourself vulnerable. This project won't work. Nobody's going to want to learn sewing in a forgotten neighborhood. Then, I'll teach for free, I said. Silence on the other end. Then, you'll regret this. And he hung up. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding, but instead of fear, I felt anger. Then something else, a strange strength. It was as if every threat he threw at me was fuel on a flame I didn't even know burned inside me. That night I handwrote a note and taped it to the warehouse door. Here we don't build wealth with humiliation. Here we stitch dignity. The next day something beautiful happened. A young woman appeared at the gate, skinny, a backpack on her shoulders, about 20-something. Are you Mrs. Brooks? She asked. I am. I heard about your studio. I've always wanted to learn to sew. Can I help paint? My heart nearly burst. Her name was Lucy, unemployed, a single mother. She'd taken a bus from another neighborhood just to see if it was true that someone was turning an old warehouse into a free place to learn a trade. That day, we started painting together. Between the smell of paint and the shy sound of her laughter, I realized, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. But fate, cruel as ever, hadn't given me a break. The revenge of the powerful doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves, and the next wave was about to hit. The days that followed were a mix of exhaustion and hope. The warehouse was finally starting to take shape. The walls that had once been gray and cracked were now painted soft blue and white. Lucy came every day, sometimes bringing other young women with her. They helped, without expecting anything in return. They talked about their lives, their struggles, their disappointments, and I listened because in each story I recognized a small part of myself. The place was beginning to breathe again, and so was I. But peace has never stayed long in my life. One afternoon, as we finished painting a window, Lucy's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, went pale, and showed me the video. It was my daughter-in-law again. That same mocking tone, talking straight to the camera. Hey, everyone, remember the mother-in-law from the mug video? Well, now she thinks she's a fashion designer. She's turning the company's old warehouse into a free sewing class. LOL. I love when failure dresses up as a charity project. The blood rushed to my face. That voice, that laugh. It was like reliving Mother's Day all over again. Lucy looked at me, unsure what to say. I stayed quiet for a moment, then sat down on the wooden bench and stared at the floor. Again, that word pounded in my head. Again, they were exposing me. Again, they were turning me into a joke. Again, they were trying to make me small. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't the same woman from that first video. That Nora, the one who cried in silence in her kitchen, holding a broken mug, was gone. The woman standing now, she was ready to fight. Even so, the wound stung. It hurt to see people laughing in the comments. They called my project the Bitter Old Lady's Warehouse, the Reject Course, the Shameful Sewing Club. The internet is cruel, especially when it finds a wounded woman to turn into entertainment. Over the next few days, I noticed some of the girls stopped coming. The weight of public ridicule is heavy. They didn't want to be associated with me. And I understood. But it hurt. It hurt because in every absence, I saw the power of contempt, the way it crushes hope. Once again, I was alone. Just me, the silence, and those half-painted walls. I looked around and wondered if it was worth continuing. Part of me wanted to quit, shut everything down, turn off the lights and pretend I had never dared to try. But then I saw something on the floor. A small piece of fabric Lucy had dropped. A scrap of cotton with a crooked stitch. So simple. But there, amid the dust, it looked like a symbol. The start of something. A tiny, stubborn seed. I picked up the fabric, sat at the old sewing machine I'd once used to mend clothes for neighbors, and started to sew. No plan, no thought, just movement. As the needle rose and fell, I began to cry. I cried for everything that had been stolen from me. My respect, my voice, my dignity. But I also cried for everything I still had: steady hands, a stubborn heart, and a courage they would never understand. When I finished, there was a small patchwork bag sitting on the table. Maybe it wasn't pretty, but to me, it was proof that I could still create. And those who create, don't give up. That night, I hung the little bag on the wall of the warehouse and went home. When I arrived, there was a note, taped to my gate. No signature. Just one sentence scrawled in big letters: "Old woman, you're going to embarrass yourself again." I stood there, the paper trembling in my hands. For a second, fear tried to take over. But fear, once it runs out of room, turns into fury. And that's exactly what happened. I went inside, straight to my bedroom, and grabbed a notebook. I started writing down names: the women from the neighborhood, the single mothers, the ones who'd once asked for help and had nowhere to go. I would find each one of them. I would show them this warehouse wasn't a shame, it was a shelter. The next morning, I woke up early and went door to door. Some ignored me. Others looked doubtful. But in a few eyes, I saw something: hope. As if the simple idea of learning, of creating something with their own hands, had sparked a light inside them. And I clung to that spark. The following week, 7 women showed up. 7. And to me, it felt like an army. The first class was simple. I taught them how to hem, how to align fabric, how to measure with the tape. But the most beautiful thing was the light in their eyes. They laughed, shared stories, and forgot their pain for a few hours. And in the hum of old sewing machines and their genuine laughter, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. But the internet never forgives. The video my daughter-in-law had posted mocking the losers class went viral again. I didn't know it yet, but that video was about to unleash another wave of humiliation. One that wouldn't come from strangers online, but from my own family. I've always believed that what comes from the outside hurts, but what comes from the inside destroys. And that's exactly what happened. The classes at the studio were growing. The 7 women who had started with me were bringing others, and soon we were 12. The warehouse, once empty and cold, was now alive. Fabrics hanging, sewing machines humming, laughter echoing through the walls. Every morning, I opened the doors with a light heart, feeling that, for the first time in years, I was doing something that truly mattered. But the internet is a treacherous creature. It never sleeps. It feeds on the misery of others, and the more honest the pain, the crueler the audience becomes. That Saturday, when I arrived at the studio, the women were quiet, staring down at their phones. Lucy was the first to approach. "Mrs. Brooks, did you see this?" She handed me her phone. On the screen was a new video. Someone had made an edit, splicing together the old Mother's Day clip with new footage, filmed by someone inside the warehouse. There I was, teaching the women how to sew, laughing with them, while mocking captions flashed across the screen. When humiliation becomes a class, the warehouse of bitterness. She failed as a mother, now she wants to teach sewing. My whole body went cold. The blood drained from my veins, my legs went weak. For a moment, the world went silent. Then came the shock. And with it, one question. Who filmed that? I looked around. All the women lowered their eyes, except one. A new girl, with a smile that had always felt a little forced. She'd joined recently, saying she wanted to help promote the project. I had never suspected a thing. But now, seeing the way she avoided my gaze, my heart told me the truth. It was her. I didn't have to say a word. She muttered an apology and hurried out. I stood there, phone trembling in my hand, as the other women watched me with a mix of pity and anger. Lucy came over and held my arm. "Don't pay attention to that, Mrs. Brooks. We know who you are. They're just scared of a strong woman." But I couldn't answer, because deep down, I knew the worst pain was still to come. That afternoon when I got home, the phone rang. It was my oldest brother's voice. "Nora, for God's sake, what is all this I'm hearing about you? People at church are talking about the warehouse, the videos, the internet mess. You need to stop this, sis. You're embarrassing the family." Embarrassing, that word cut straight through me like a knife. Embarrassing, I repeated. "You saw me humiliated online, mocked in front of everyone, and said nothing. But now that I'm standing up, that's what's shameful." He sighed. "You know the world doesn't forgive, Nora. Sometimes it's better to just accept what life gives you. Accept, as if humiliation were a natural destiny. As if being old, poor, and alone meant you were supposed to bow to contempt." I took a deep breath, holding back tears. "You know, brother, maybe what really embarrasses the family isn't my warehouse. It's your silence." And I hung up. That night I sat in the kitchen staring into nothing. The lights were off. The only sound was a dog barking in the distance. That house, once filled with laughter and the smell of fresh cake, now felt like a tomb. The clock on the wall showed nearly midnight when I heard a knock at the door. It was Lucy. She was holding a bowl of soup. "I thought you shouldn't be alone tonight," she said. I sat down with her. We ate in silence. When we finished, she looked at me and said, "They can laugh all they want, but you're teaching us more than sewing. You're teaching us not to bow our heads." And I cried. I cried like a child. Because for the first time, someone saw in me something I hadn't seen in myself for a long time. In the days that followed, I decided to keep going, even with the videos spreading, even with the cruel comments. I opened the warehouse every day, and little by little, the women came back, one by one, ashamed, afraid, but they came. That pain turned into strength, and every stitch we sewed in those classes was a thread of dignity woven back into our lives. But deep down, I knew, they still hadn't given up on destroying me, and the next blow wouldn't come through a screen. It would come for real. I think every woman who's ever tried to start over knows this. When you begin rebuilding what was destroyed, someone always shows up to remind you of the ruins. And that's exactly what happened to me. The studio was beginning to blossom again. The women had come back, more united, more determined. Every afternoon, the hum of sewing machines and the smell of fresh fabric filled the warehouse with life. It felt like every stitch we made was a piece of my heart being mended. And I truly believed the worst was behind us. But envy never sleeps. It watches. It waits, and the moment it sees a woman standing tall, it strikes. That Monday morning, I arrived early. The sun had barely risen. The gate was half open, the lock on the ground. For a moment, I thought one of the girls had arrived before me. But when I pushed the door open, the air left my lungs. The walls were covered in black paint. The words, I'll never forget them. "Fake saint, bitter old hag, the studio of failure." I stood frozen, unable to breathe. The floor was stained and filthy. The machines we'd worked so hard to repair were sprayed over. Even the patchwork bag I'd hung so proudly was torn in half, tossed into a corner. My first reaction was silence. Then came the lump in my throat, and finally anger. Not wild anger, though, a cold, steady anger. A voice inside me saying, "They think they can erase you." Lucy arrived soon after. When she saw it, she covered her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God, they did this on purpose." All I could say was, "They did, but they're not going to win." I grabbed a cloth, a bucket, and started to clean. The women arrived one by one and joined me. No pity, no tears, just movement. And in the middle of the sharp smell of paint and the ache in my chest, something beautiful was born. Silent solidarity. That warehouse, bruised and dirty, became a symbol of resistance. As I scrubbed, I thought about the meaning behind those words. Who could have done it? The answer was obvious: someone who couldn't stand to see a woman rise without permission. By the time we'd washed away most of the stains, the sun was high. My arms ached, my body was tired, but a new kind of strength had taken hold of me. I asked the girls to leave me alone for a while. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the stained walls, and whispered, "You can write whatever you want. I know who I am." Then, I took a piece of white fabric and a sewing marker. In big letters, I wrote, "Here, we sue courage." I pinned the fabric right in the center of the most vandalized wall, and for some reason, seeing it hanging there brought me peace. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. People started stopping by on the street to look. Some took pictures, others asked what the place was, and the women answered proudly, "It's Mrs. Brooks's studio." Little by little, what was meant to humiliate us became something else, first curiosity, then respect. But my son and his wife, oh, they didn't like that one bit. The following week, I received a notice. Letterhead, formal language, unauthorized use of property. It said the warehouse was being used without proper consent. The signature, my son's company. I read the paper 3 times. With each reading, my heartbeat grew faster. They were trying to silence me through the law, now turn my dignity into a violation. I folded the notice carefully and slipped it into my purse. This time, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, I would act. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not one of anger, one of truth. I explained what the studio was doing, how many women had learned there, how the place was transforming the neighborhood. I sent a copy to an old friend who worked at the local newspaper. It wasn't revenge. It was justice and a voice, and as I folded the letter, I thought to myself, they think I'm weak because I speak softly. But someday they'll learn that strength isn't in the shout, it's in the persistence. At first, I didn't think anyone would read the letter. I sent it to my friend at the newspaper, more out of the need to unburden myself than out of hope. But 2 days later, the phone rang. It was her, excited. "Nora, your story is powerful. We want to run a feature. Can I send a reporter over?" My heart raced. Suddenly, that little warehouse was about to receive a visitor who could change everything. The reporter came on a warm afternoon, polite, simple, kind. He asked gentle questions. Why the studio? What sewing meant to me? Who the women learning there were? While he took notes, I spoke straight from the heart. "I'm not just teaching them how to sew," I said. "I'm teaching them how to see themselves again." The next day, the article came out. On the front page, "Woman turns humiliation into hope for her community." There was a picture of us, me and the women laughing, our hands full of colorful thread. Seeing it printed was like reclaiming a piece of my name. The reactions came fast. Neighbors who had never once stepped inside the studio began to show up. They brought donations, scraps of fabric, spools of thread, buttons. An older gentleman offered to fix the sewing machines for free. Even a nearby school asked if we could make simple uniforms for their students. The warehouse, which not long ago had been a source of ridicule, was now a place people wanted to visit. And for the first time, the word old was followed by another word, strong. But my son didn't like it. Neither did his wife. At the end of the week, he showed up at the gate, tense. "Mom, what is this? People are talking about you everywhere. You should think about the family's name." I looked at him and answered slowly, "I did think about it. That's exactly why I'm cleaning it up." He said nothing. He just left, leaving behind that heavy scent of contained anger, the kind that comes from realizing you've lost control. Meanwhile, the classes kept growing. Lucy helped me organize the groups. The women started sewing bags, skirts, cushions. We sold them cheap, just enough to reinvest in the space. With every sale, I saw that same sparkle in their eyes that I remembered from my own youth, the pride of being able to say, "I made this." One afternoon, an older woman from the next street came to the door. She carried a simple cake wrapped in a cloth. "Mrs. Brooks, I don't know how to sew," she said, "but I wanted to thank you. My granddaughter comes here," and she smiles again. "Thank you." She left the cake and walked away. I stood there, holding the warm bundle, breathing in the scent of vanilla, remembering the days when I used to do the same for my son. My heart tightened, but it didn't hurt. It was just longing. A soft, peaceful kind of longing. By Sunday, the whole neighborhood felt different. The warehouse now had a hand-painted sign the women had made, "House of Free Hands, the art of starting over." It hung a little crooked, but it was beautiful. And when the wind blew, the colorful ribbons danced as if the place itself was alive. That night, I sat at the door alone. The moon was full, and I couldn't help thinking about how much things had changed. What had once been shame became voice. What had once been mockery became purpose. And what had once been loneliness became home. But deep down, I knew the calm before the next storm was already gathering. The studio's success was starting to rattle the powerful. And when people used to having control see a simple woman rise, what always comes next is the attempt to take away what she built. When the wind changes, the heart feels it before the eyes can see. I was finishing a class, the women were laughing. The rhythm of sewing machines filling the warehouse when the sound of a car pulling up out front made my stomach twist. I don't know why, but I knew. It was him, my son. I opened the door, and there he was. Neatly pressed suit, rehearsed look, forced smile. Behind him stood his wife, elegant as always, phone in hand. But for the first time, there was no mocking grin. She looked serious, and somehow, that scared me more than her contempt ever had. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice was calm, too calm sweet in a way that only comes from people who've already hurt you. And I'd learned, through life, that when sweetness comes from the ones who've wounded you, it always tastes like poison. I took a slow breath. "We can," I said. "But out here, the studio's full." He glanced around, taking in the painted walls, the movement, the smell of coffee in the air. And for a moment, I saw it the discomfort of a man standing in a place he once laughed at. "The warehouse looks nice, Mom," he said. "It does," I answered. "It's alive now." He smiled, tight-lipped. "I came in peace. Okay. We want to help. My mother-in-law has contacts, knows people in City Hall. We can formalize the studio, turn it into a non-profit. That way you'll have support, everything legal and proper." Legalized, the word echoed in my mind. Pretty clean, but hollow. Like those fake flowers they put on coffins. I looked him straight in the eyes. "And what do you get out of it?" He hesitated. "Nothing. We just want what's best for you," his wife added, smiling. "After all, you deserve recognition." But I know the look of a liar. And that cold glint in her eyes, it was the same one from the mug video. They weren't here to help. They were here to take back control. "I appreciate it," I said flatly. "But I don't need it." "Mom, don't be stubborn. You could lose everything again." "Son," I said softly, "I already lost everything once. And that's how I learned what truly belongs to me." He sighed, impatient now. "Think it over, okay? I'll come back later so we can sign the papers." Before I could answer, they were already heading back to the car. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of her filming the gate. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. In the days that followed, I tried not to think about it. I kept teaching, pretending everything was fine. But at night, my mind wouldn't stop. What did they want? Why the sudden interest now? Then one morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox, printed documents, full of legal jargon, partnership proposal, transfer of use, and at the end, in tiny letters, authorization for property assignment to the company. My name wasn't even mentioned. It was as if I'd been written out of my own story. I closed the envelope slowly, didn't cry, but felt a deep, steady anger burning through me. That afternoon, Lucy noticed my silence. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Brooks?" I handed her the paper. She read it, her face turning red. "They're trying to take the warehouse again." I nodded. "They are. But this time, they won't." She smiled nervously. "So what are you going to do?" "So," I said, "like I always have." Lucy laughed, confused, but I knew what I meant. Because sewing is an ancient art. We mend what's been torn, and we hide the stitches that hold strength together. And that's what I would do, resist quietly, firmly, until they realized the days of my submission were over. At the end of the day, after everyone left, I sat alone in the studio and looked at the closed gate. The same gate that once witnessed my humiliation now guarded something no one could take away, reclaimed dignity. But I knew their visit wasn't the end. It was only the first stitch in a crooked seam they'd soon try to pull tight, and I was ready to cut the thread if I had to. For the next few days, the silence inside the warehouse felt heavier than usual. The machines still clattered, but inside me there was a strange noise, a kind of warning that wouldn't quiet down. Lucy kept saying I seemed different, distracted. She was right. It was as if my body was there, but my soul stood watch, eyes open, waiting for the blow. And the blow came. It was a Thursday afternoon. The mailman arrived with a large envelope, stamped and sealed. Judicial delivery, the top read. I signed for it, my hands trembling, and waited for the women to leave before opening it. Inside were pages and pages, fine print, cold language. It took me a few minutes to understand what I was reading, but once I did, the ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. It was a notice of property transfer. The document stated that I, Nora Brooks, had authorized the permanent use of the warehouse by my son's company, and at the bottom, in black ink, was a signature that looked exactly like mine, but it wasn't. I stared at that paper for minutes, then hours, trying to understand how someone who came from inside of you could have a heart cold enough to do this. My throat tightened, my stomach turned, my legs gave out. I leaned against the table for support. The first tear fell silently, heavy. Then came the rest. I cried for every year I'd kept quiet, for every simple meal I'd stretched so he could eat better, for every pair of worn-out shoes I'd hidden so I could buy him a suit for graduation, for everything I gave that he used to destroy me. When night came, the warehouse was dark and still. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall. The moonlight slipped through the window, drawing the shadows of the bars across the floor. And I thought, that's what they want from me, to feel caged again. But something in me refused to give in. Even with my soul torn open, there was still a thread of resistance, thin, invisible, but strong. I took the envelope, folded the papers carefully, and placed them inside a wooden box, not out of fear, but because I'd realized something. To fight back doesn't always mean to shout. Sometimes it means to breathe, to plan. The next morning, Lucy noticed my swollen eyes. Something happened, she asked. I showed her the papers. She read them and looked at me, horrified. This is forgery, Mrs. Brooks. You can't let them get away with this. All I said was, I know. But right now, I need to think before I act. She nodded, not pushing further. We understood each other without many words. During class, I tried to keep my voice steady, but my mind wandered. Every time I saw one of the women sewing, I thought about the value of what we'd built together. No luxury, no fame, just dignity. And that was exactly what they were trying to take away. At the end of the day, I walked to the gate, the same gate that had once symbolized shame, then pride, and now, threat. I closed it slowly and rested my forehead against the cool iron, took a deep breath and whispered, they can tamper with papers, but they can't touch what was made with love. That night I prayed, not for revenge, not for quick justice. I prayed for light, to keep from losing myself in the darkness of anger, to stay who I am, even after all of this. And there, between tears and silence, an idea began to take shape, small, but clear. I needed help, but not just any help. I needed someone who understood not only the law, but pain. And deep in my heart, I knew exactly where to go. Tomorrow, I would knock on the right door. There's a kind of exhaustion the body can't explain. It's not sore legs or lost sleep. It's a weight that comes from inside, as if every memory were pulling you down. That's how I started that week, my face heavy, my shoulders slumped, my smile slow to appear. On the outside, I kept teaching. On the inside, I was crumbling. The women could tell. Lucy kept urging me to rest, but I told her I was fine. Mothers always say they're fine even when their hearts are in ruins. On Tuesday, the studio was full. The machines hummed, sunlight poured through the windows. I was showing them a new stitch, but my hands were trembling, the thread slipping between my fingers. My words came out slow, almost choked. Then suddenly, everything went silent. The sound of the machines vanished. The women's voices turned into distant echoes. The floor seemed to tilt. I tried to hold onto the table, but my body didn't respond. And for an instant, all I saw was white. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor. Lucy was fanning my face with a rag, the women standing around, frightened. Her voice trembled. Mrs. Brooks, oh my God, you fainted. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't let me. A lump of tears rose, and all I could do was nod. She helped me sit up slowly. Cold sweat trickled down my forehead. I'm fine. Just tired, I said. A lie. It wasn't exhaustion, it was too much sorrow crammed into one body. Lucy insisted on taking me home. She locked up the studio and walked me to the gate, her arm under mine. As we went, I felt the weight of those walls behind me, like even the space itself was tired with me. At home, the silence was cruel. Every corner reminded me of what I'd lost. The envelope with the forged papers still sat on the table, staring back at me. And suddenly, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. Not a pretty, movie kind of cry. I cried ugly, quietly, with my face buried in my hands. I cried for the mother I had been, for the woman I stopped being so others could shine. I cried for everything love had made me swallow in the name of peace, and for the first time, I understood what I felt wasn't just sadness. It was mourning. I was grieving for myself. Lucy came by later that afternoon. She brought soup, bread, and silence. The best kind of love is the one that doesn't need words. She sat in the chair beside me, watching, giving me space. Then she said softly, "You don't have to be strong all the time." That sentence hit me hard, because that's what life teaches us, to be strong, but never how to fall apart. And sometimes, falling is the only way to breathe again. That night, before bed, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of my mother. She used to sew too. When I was little, I'd watch her fingers dance with the thread. Once, I asked why she sewed so much. She smiled and said, "Because it's the only way I know how to fix the world. Sweetheart, one stitch at a time." I closed my eyes and whispered it to myself, one stitch at a time. Maybe that was it. Maybe I just needed to stop trying to mend everything at once. Even the strongest thread breaks when you pull too hard. The next morning, I woke slowly, still tired but with a faint, gentle peace. Lucy arrived early, with the others. They made coffee, opened the windows, let the sunlight in. They laughed and chatted, pretending nothing had happened, but I saw it in their eyes. They were taking care of me. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. All my life, I'd been the woman who held everyone else up, but now, I was the woman being held up by other women. And that wasn't weakness. It was healing. Memory is a fragile fabric. Sometimes it tears in silence. Sometimes it unravels before we even notice. But that morning, after the collapse, I felt I needed to return to the old threads of my life, the ones that stitched me together before the world tried to pull me apart. I sat at the table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, the sun peeking shyly through the window. The house was still quiet, smelling of soap and memory. I looked down at my hands marked steady, the same hands that once held my son's and my mother's before his, and suddenly, she was there. Not as an image, but as a kind presence, a distant echo of someone who taught more through her gaze than through words. I remembered her at the old sewing machine, the rhythmic pedal sound and her soft humming. That was how she faced life, with thread, fabric, and faith. Back then, I didn't understand. I thought sewing was something small, something women did when they had no choice. But now I saw it for what it was: resistance. Her way of saying to the world, "I'm still here." I took the old sewing box I'd inherited from her. Inside, there was still a spool of beige thread, worn thin, and a measuring tape frayed at the edges. The smell pulled me back to childhood. It was the scent of quiet strength, the patience that turned scraps into dresses, exhaustion into pride. I ran the tape between my fingers slowly, like caressing time itself, and I realized each number, each inch, was a measure of life. What we lose, what we gain, what we adjust. That's what sewing really is, learning to adjust without erasing. And I understood that's exactly what I needed to do now, adjust my story, without letting anyone cut it from me. Lucy arrived later, and found me sitting there with the box open, going through memories. "Mrs. Brooks?" she asked. I smiled. "Through roots." She sat down, curious, and I began to tell her. I told her about my mother, those long nights sewing by lamplight, the clients who paid with vegetables, the clothes she made so we could look dignified even when poverty knocked on our door. Lucy listened quietly. When I finished, she said, "Seems like you were born with a thread in your hands." I replied without thinking, "Or maybe the thread was born with me." And in that instant, something lit up inside me. The memory didn't hurt anymore, it inspired. My mother hadn't sewn out of necessity. She sewed to bring the pieces together. And that's what I would do, bring mine together. I spent the rest of the day in silence, stitching small, colorful scraps, not to sell, to remember. Each piece represented a part of my story. Yellow for the joy of childhood, red for love and anger, blue for the calm I was still searching for, and white for the forgiveness I hadn't yet learned to give. When I joined them all, it formed a crooked, beautiful square full of flaws, but mine. I looked at it and felt proud. Maybe life was like that too, imperfect, but sewn by our own hands. That evening, I called Lucy and the other women over. I showed them the patchwork. I want each of you to make one too, I said. A piece of your own story. Then we'll join them all together and turn it into something bigger. They looked at each other, moved. Lucy was the first to smile. A quilt of new beginnings. I nodded. Yes, a quilt to remind us that no woman is just a fragment. We are the whole fabric even when we've been mended. When they left, I stayed alone in the studio again, but it wasn't the same lonely emptiness. It was a fertile silence, full of meaning. I turned on the sewing machine and listened to that steady, metallic rhythm. It sounded like a heartbeat. And there, with my fingers steady on the fabric, I realized what my mother left me wasn't just an inheritance, it was a calling. To keep sewing not only with needle and thread, but with courage. Because that's what women have done for centuries. They sew the world together so it doesn't fall apart. After the memory of my mother, something inside me lit up again. It wasn't a burst of fire, it was an ember. Small, steady, stubborn. And that's how hope is born in women. Quiet, but unbreakable. I knew the fight wasn't over. The forged papers were still tucked away, and the risk was still real. But now, instead of fear, I felt drive. The will to rebuild, with my own hands, and with the hands of those who believed beside me. It was on a Wednesday afternoon when I decided to start. I called Lucy aside and whispered, "We're going to renovate the studio, but in secret, at night. No noise, no announcement." Her eyes widened. "In secret?" "Yes," I said. "So they won't have time to destroy it before they see what we've made." She smiled, that kind of knowing smile women share when they recognize courage in each other. And that very night, at 7, the women started to arrive. One brought paint, another a ladder, another an old radio. The warehouse seemed to breathe differently. The hum of sewing machines gave way to the scrape of brooms, the thud of hammers, the muffled sound of laughter. And every movement carried meaning. It wasn't the rebuilding of walls, it was the rebuilding of souls. During the day, the studio ran, as usual, classes, coffee, conversation. But when the sun went down, the secret came alive. We painted the walls again, this time in warm colors, yellow, dusty rose, a touch of blue. Lucy said it looked like a sunset. And I replied, "That's exactly what it is. Every new beginning is born at the end of something else." One neighbor, Mr. Johnson, noticed the late-night work and showed up smiling. "Mrs. Brooks, can I help? I've got some wood scraps at home." Soon after came others, a young man with extra light bulbs, an older woman with curtains. Before long, what began as a secret turned into a kind whisper spreading through the neighborhood. Not gossip, but goodwill. And the warehouse began to change. The windows got new glass. The tables were sanded and repainted. The floor, once stained, now gleamed. And across the top of one wall, Lucy painted in big letters, "Here we mend what the world has torn." As they worked, I watched. I saw each woman focused, sweaty, smiling. Women who once shrank from life now stood tall, holding brushes in hope. It was beautiful. And I remembered the nights when my mother sewed alone, believing no one was watching. Now, there were many of us, and what she began, I was continuing. Sometimes, during breaks, our talk turned to confessions. One spoke of a painful divorce, another of losing her job, another of fearing she'd grow old and be forgotten. And in all their stories, I realized we shared something. Each of us was learning to stitch ourselves back together from the inside. One night, long after everyone had gone home, I stayed alone in the studio. The walls were still damp, the smell of paint heavy in the air. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and listened to the new silence of the place. It wasn't empty, it was peace. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud. Proud of myself, my hands, my story. I opened my notebook and wrote on the first page, "As long as there's thread, there's repair." I smiled, because I knew there was still so much to do. But now, I wasn't alone anymore. And when a woman stops being alone, the whole world starts to move a little differently. That Saturday morning, the sun rose bright. The women arrived early, full of excitement. Only a few final touches were left. Lucy looked around and said, "It's ready." I shook my head. "Not yet." I took a large piece of white fabric and painted in red letters, "Donna Nora's Studio, House of Free Hands." We hung it above the door. The women clapped, some cried, and I took a deep breath and silently thanked the woman I used to be, the one who almost gave up, because if she had, this one wouldn't exist. The days after the renovation were full of light. The studio looked completely different, bright, alive, full of movement. The open windows let the wind dance through the hanging fabrics, and the hum of the sewing machines became music. Every morning, when I opened the gate, I could smell paint and possibility. It was rebirth, stitched together by hand. The women arrived, cheerful, laughing, sharing stories. Lucy said the neighborhood was changing, that people stopped in the street to watch us work. And it was true. Even the baker, who used to just wave from afar, now brought us fresh bread for free. We weren't selling luxury, we were selling meaning. And that, somehow, started to bother the kind of people who don't understand what it's like to have value without a price tag. One afternoon, while the women were sewing, Lucy burst in, breathless, phone in hand. "Mrs. Brooks, you need to see this." On the screen, the image was clear. My daughter-in-law, with that same mocking smile, speaking to the camera. "Guys, remember, my mother-in-law's little studio? Well, now she's calling it a community project. Ha ha ha. Guess it's just her way of hiding the fact that she's illegally using the company's property, right?" The room went silent. The women exchanged looks. My chest tightened, but I didn't say a word. I just took a deep breath and said, "Turn it up." She went on, smirking. "The internet forgets fast, but I haven't forgotten who she is, the mother of an ungrateful son. And we all know what kind of mother raises someone like that." Lucy lowered the phone, furious. "This is slander, Mrs. Brooks. You have to respond." But I stayed quiet, because deep down, I felt the world was already preparing its own reply. 2 days later, the reply came, not from my mouth, from life itself. A local community page, Voices of the Neighborhood, posted a photo of our studio, colorful, full of smiling women. The caption read, "While some waste time mocking, Mrs. Brooks and her students are sewing dignity, a free project helping women start over." Within hours, there were hundreds of comments, people praising, sharing, asking for the address, offering to donate supplies, and among the compliments came a memory. Someone found the old video, the one with the mug, and wrote, "Look at that." The woman who was humiliated became an example. I read it in silence, my heart racing. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth revealing itself without me having to say a thing. The next day, Lucy arrived with tears in her eyes. "Did you see? Your daughter-in-law deleted her account." People started flooding her comments, defending you. I nodded calmly. The world has a way of setting things right. Sometimes it takes a while, but it happens. She smiled. "You should see what they're saying. They call you an inspiration." And without realizing, I started to cry. Because the woman who had once been a joke was now an example. And I hadn't had to shout for it. All I had to do was keep sewing. That night, the studio was packed. It wasn't class, it was celebration. The women brought cake, coffee, music. We danced, we laughed, we remembered how it all began. Lucy stood on a chair and said, "Today's the turning point, Mrs. Brooks. Today the world saw who you really are." I laughed, a little shy, but deep down, I knew she was right. Because at that moment, surrounded by that circle of women clapping their hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Justice, not the kind written on legal paper, the kind that comes when your heart realizes that surviving was the best answer. Later, when everyone left, I sat alone at the table and looked around. The walls were marked with paint, the floor was scattered with threads, the smell of coffee still lingered in the air, and I thought, they wanted me to feel ashamed. But here, in this studio, I learned that their shame will never be mine again. I smiled. Because sometimes, life takes its time to applaud, but when it finally does, the sound echoes deep. Silence has its own sound when it comes before something important. That afternoon, the breeze was soft, the air smelled of thread and soap, and I was alone, folding fabric in the studio. The women had left early. The sun slipped in through the windows in golden stripes, and everything felt calm to calm. Then I heard the creak of the gate opening slowly. I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, my son. He stepped inside hesitantly, his shoulders slumped, his face drawn. He wasn't the confident, arrogant man I remembered. He seemed smaller, not in body and spirit, Mom. His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I laid the cloth down on the table and stood still. I didn't speak. I just let the silence fill the space between us. He took a deep breath and went on. I lost everything." That simple sentence cut through the air like scissors through cloth. "The company, it's gone." My mother-in-law pulled away. "The debts swallowed me." And he swallowed hard. "I don't have anywhere to go. I looked at him, tired eyes, trembling hands. It was hard to see both the son I'd raised and the man who'd hurt me. But a mother sees both at once, what was, and what still might be. And what do you want from me? I asked softly. Help, a place to stay for a while. Advice, anything. For a moment, the old instinct of motherhood tried to take over, the urge to comfort, to protect, but then the memories came rushing back. The forged papers, the laughter, the video, and my heart stood divided between love and memory. He went on, voice trembling. I was wrong, Mom. I thought success was everything, that money would make me someone, but what I did to you made me no one. I lowered my head. Those words hurt and healed all at once. You know, son, I began. We grow up thinking love means giving. Giving everything. Giving always. But love is also teaching someone how to lose. And you had to lose to understand what you never knew how to keep. He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. I know, Mom, and I'm paying for it. I don't want you to hate me. I gave a sad smile. I never hated you. I just learned to love myself, too. And sometimes, loving yourself means saying no. Silence returned, heavy, but no longer hostile. He looked around the room, taking in the studio, the same space he once tried to take from me. The colorful walls, the hanging fabrics, the soft sound of the curtains moving with the wind. All of it told my story without me saying a word. You won, didn't you? He asked, trying to smile. No, I said. I endured. Winning is for those who want to compete. Enduring is for those who want to exist. He nodded slowly. And in that gesture, I saw just for a moment the little boy who once held my hand to cross the street. That boy was still there, lost inside the man. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Thank you for listening. I always listened, son. You were just late to speak." He stopped at the door, looked back, and asked, "Do you forgive me?" I took my time to answer, looked at him gently and said, "Not yet, but one day. Forgiveness needs time. It has to be stitched together." He lowered his head and left. The gate closed softly behind him. I stayed there, alone, feeling my heart both heavy and light at once. It was strange, the pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. And for the first time, I understood that true forgiveness isn't saying it's okay. It's looking at the wound and knowing it no longer defines you. Autumn arrived without asking permission. The mornings were cold, the smell of coffee stronger, and there was a feeling of change in the air. The studio was thriving, full classes, laughter, bright fabrics swaying in the open windows, but I could feel it. Something was moving beneath the calm, a different kind of wind. That old intuition only mothers have, the one that warns you when danger starts circling back. And it did. It was a Friday evening. The sun was dipping low, turning the freshly painted walls golden, when I heard the sharp sound of a car stopping outside. The gate opened without a knock. My son walked in. Behind him, two men in suits, black briefcases in hand. Lucy and the women exchanged worried looks. My chest tightened, but I stood steady. I'd known this moment would command this time. I wouldn't face it alone. "Mrs. Brooks," one of the men began, formal and cold, "we're here to enforce an eviction order. The property is being repossessed by the owning company." My son kept his head down, unable to look at me. But I saw his hands trembling, the same tremor he had as a child, when he knew he'd done wrong. "Owning company," I asked calmly. "That's funny, because, as far as I know, the name on the deed is still mine." The man hesitated, opened his folder, flipped through the pages. "We have here a signed transfer of ownership." Lucy stepped forward. "That signature's fake." The women began to gather around me, one, then two, then 10. Within minutes, the studio was full. Women of all ages, their hands marked by thread and paint, forming a living wall between me and those men. It was a simple scene but powerful. No one shouted, no one pushed. We just stood there, side by side, silent and solid like a perfect stitch that refuses to break. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we don't want any trouble." "Neither do I," I said. "I just want what's mine. What's ours." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside were certified copies of the property record with my name in bold print. Everything was there: stamp, date, registration number. I had ordered them days earlier, following a quiet instinct that I might need them. I handed the paper to the man and said, "Here's the truth. If you want to keep this up, take it to court. But if there's one thing I've learned in life, It's that not every victory needs a stamp. Some come with a clean conscience. He looked at the document, then at my son, who still hadn't moved. The two men exchanged glances, closed their folders, and left without another word. We stood there in silence. My son lingered at the doorway, his face heavy with shame. Lucy broke the quiet. "Well, Mrs. Brooks, looks like the eviction just changed sides." The women laughed, nervous but relieved, and I smiled too, not out of spite, but out of freedom. She was right. The eviction had changed sides. It wasn't me being pushed out anymore. It was the guilt, the fear, the humiliation finally leaving my home. My son stepped closer. "I didn't know it would come to this," he said quietly. "Yes, you did," I replied firmly. "You just didn't believe I'd stand my ground." He lowered his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't argue. He just stood there, looking around, seeing what I'd built with my own hands and, with the strength of so many others. The studio wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours, and no one could ever erase that again. When he left, the sun was setting. The sky glowed copper, the windows reflecting the soft evening light. The women opened the gate, and neighbors began to arrive, people who'd heard what happened and came to check on us. An older woman brought coffee. A boy brought flowers, and the studio filled with voices, laughter, life. Lucy hugged me and whispered, "Did you notice? Today we didn't need a lawyer. We just needed each other." I nodded, eyes wet with tears, because she was right. They had tried to take the ground from under me, but what they never understood is that a woman who learns to sow can always make wings from what's left. Time passed, and for the first time in many years, it passed slowly. No rush, no pain. Life in the studio moved peacefully, a beautiful rhythm of sewing machines humming and women's voices filling the air. Classes were full. The women laughed, shared stories, cared for each other. The neighborhood had begun calling that place the heart of the street, and I finally felt that my own heart beat lightly again. But life has a curious way of testing us, right when the soul starts to rest. It was a warm Saturday afternoon. The sun slid lazily through the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted across the room. The women had already gone home, and I stayed behind, folding scraps of fabric. Then I heard a gentle knock on the gate, twice, soft. The kind of knock that doesn't just ask to come in, it asks to come back. I walked over, and when I opened it, the world seemed to stop for a moment. It was Mrs. Vera. She looked different. Her once perfect hair was now streaked with gray. Her face tired, her eyes hollow. The jewelry was gone, the heels too. In her hands, just a simple handbag and a look, human, a look I had never seen on her before. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I come in?" I hesitated, not out of cruelty but because the past ran through my mind in a single flash. The video, the laughter, the watch, the humiliation. But above all, I remembered myself, the woman who once swallowed her pride just to avoid crying in front of them. I stepped aside slowly. "Come in." She entered and looked around, taking in the studio, the colorful walls, the fabrics, the framed phrases the women had painted. Everything glowed with a simple, honest beauty, so unlike the empty luxury she used to flaunt. "It's beautiful here," she said. I nodded, saying nothing. "I saw the articles," she went on. "I heard about the project, about the success." A weight settled in my chest, not anger, something more complicated, a mix of memory and compassion. That woman, who had once mocked me, now stood before me lost. Her tone wasn't arrogant anymore. It was human. "I've lost everything, Nora," she said, the words dry, stripped of drama. "The stores, the money, even the friends disappeared. And your son," he pulled away. "In the end, all that's really left is the silence." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I never thought I'd see, remorse. "I came because I needed to ask for forgiveness." The air in the room went still. It wasn't a moment I ever expected. I'd imagined it many times, but in my mind, I was strong and she was weak. Life, though, isn't a play. And standing there in front of that broken woman, I didn't feel powerful. I felt empathy, because I knew what it meant to lose everything. We sat in silence for a while. Then I said, "You know, Mrs. Vera, time has a strange way of stitching things. It pulls the thread slowly, but steady. And in the end, the fabric ends up right side out." She lowered her head, crying quietly, the restrained kind of crying of someone who's never learned to do it in public. I pulled out a chair. "Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee? She nodded, too tired to speak. I poured 2 cups and placed them on the table. As the steam rose between us, I looked at her worn face and thought, life gives back what we put into it, not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need. After a moment, she spoke again. I remember that day. The watch, the laughter. I don't know what I was thinking. I answered calmly, the same thing everyone thinks when they believe they have everything, that the world is a mirror, not a window. She stayed silent, her trembling hands holding the cup. Then she looked up. Do you forgive me? I took a few seconds before answering. I didn't want to speak out of impulse. I looked around at the studio, the colors, the echoes of laughter, everything I had rebuilt with my hands and with the faith of other women. And then I said, I don't carry hate anymore. What I built here wasn't to tear the past open again, it was to stitch together what was left. So yes, I forgive you. She began to cry for real then, an unrestrained, human cry, and one, without even knowing why, cried too. 2 different women, connected by the same thread, the understanding that pain doesn't destroy, it transforms. When she left, the sun was setting. The gate closed slowly, the breeze stirred the colorful fabrics, and I stood there, breathing deeply. There was no triumph, no defeat, there was peace. And after everything that was more than enough, time passed like a well-sewn seam, firm, discreet, almost invisible. The studio thrived, classes multiplied, the women sold what they made, and the neighborhood now called that place the second home. I lived surrounded by women's voices, by laughter, by plans and possibilities, but there was still a corner inside me that remained quiet, a small space, yet persistent. The space of the son I loved, and who had hurt me. I didn't expect to see him again, not after everything, but life, with its gentle irony, loves to stitch reunions right when we've stopped waiting for them. It was an ordinary afternoon, like so many others. The sun spread gold across the studio floor, and the hum of the sewing machines sounded almost like a song. I was helping Lucy measure fabric when I heard a soft clearing of the throat near the door. I turned slowly, and there he was, my son. Different, no suit, no shine, none of that restless air of a man who thinks he commands time. His eyes carried a calm weariness, the kind that comes only after learning, late but sincerely. In his hands, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Can I come in, Mom? I paused for a moment before answering. Then, I nodded. You can. He stepped in quietly, looking around. The tables, the curtains, the flowers. The same scene that had once made him feel ashamed now drew a faint smile to his face. It's all different here. It is. Time changed it. And it changed me, too. He nodded, smiling sadly. I heard you've been helping a lot of people. I saw one of the bags the women made at the market. It was beautiful. We try to stitch what the world tears apart, I said. It's what I know how to do. Silence. The kind that's heavy, but not suffocating. The kind that means something new is beginning. He set the parcel on the table. I brought something. He untied the string slowly. Inside, a white mug, plain, unadorned, but on it, written in small, steady letters, for the woman who taught me the value of time. For a moment, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The memory of that first Mother's Day drifted in like a soft wind, the daughter-in-law's laughter, the gleam of the watch, the weight of humiliation, and suddenly, all of it lost its power. I looked at the mug, then at him. You remember. He nodded, eyes shining. I remember every day, but now I understand. I sat down slowly, holding the mug in both hands. It was light, yet it carried a whole life inside it. Mom, I don't know how to make up for what I did. You don't have to, I said. Life already took care of that. It stitches in ways we don't always understand. He stepped closer and, for the first time in years, hugged me. A quiet hug, full of remorse and tenderness. Not a son begging forgiveness, but a man coming home after being lost to himself. We stayed that way for a while. Then he said, voice trembling, I wish I could go back. You don't need to go back, son. You just need to move forward differently. When he pulled away, I saw a new light in his eyes, not guilt, but relief. And deep inside me, something loosened too. The weight I'd carried for years finally began to unravel. Before leaving, he looked around one last time. You always believed in me, didn't you? I smiled, tears in my eyes, even when I shouldn't have. But that's what mothers do. We believe, until the very last stitch. He nodded, moved. left quietly, and when the gate closed, I stood there, holding the new mug in my hands. I looked at the words written on it and thought that time, after all, was never an enemy. It was a tailor. And that day, it finally finished adjusting what had been crooked inside me for far too long. Time has a curious way of repeating itself, not in the same colors, but in echoes of what once was. And that's exactly how it felt that day. The morning sun streamed through the studio windows, the hanging threads gleaming like strands of gold, and the women laughed as they sewed, each one sharing a new dream. I watched in silence, proud. The House of Free Hands was, at last, what I'd always hoped it would be, a shelter for hope. The students were no longer students. They were teachers now, creators, women following their own paths. Lucy, now a mother herself, managed everything with the calm strength of someone who'd learned that generosity is also a form of leadership. And sometimes, I caught myself thinking that maybe my role there had always been just to plant, because when you teach someone to sow, the world multiplies. That evening, the sun turned everything orange. The women had already left, and I was folding the last pieces of fabric when I heard a familiar voice at the door. "Can I come in, Mom?" I turned slowly. It was him, my son. It had been months since our last meeting, but now, he looked different. His eyes were calm, his face older, his hands marked, not by guilt, but by work. He carried a simple paper bag and the same quiet respect of someone who knows that words alone aren't enough. "Of course you can," I said. He stepped in, taking in the space as if it were the first time. The walls full of patterns and phrases, the faint sound of the street outside, the smell of coffee in the air, all so different from the day he'd tried to take it from me. "It's beautiful here, Mom. It's alive," I corrected, smiling. He came closer to the table and set the bag down. From it, he took out a white mug, just like the other one, but new. No writing this time, only a small red stitch, hand-sewn near the rim. Inside it, a folded piece of cloth. "I made it," he said with a shy smile. "Sewed it at the workshop where I'm working now. It's small, nothing big." I took the mug gently, as if holding a second chance. I ran my fingers over the stitch, neat, steady, done with care. It was simple, but sincere. And in that red thread, there was more apology than any words could have carried. "You learned how to sew?" I asked softly. "A little," he said. "I think I finally understand why you loved it so much." I stayed quiet for a moment, looking at him. For the first time I saw a whole man, not the lost son, not the proud businessman, just a man, real, with the marks of life on his face and his hands. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "I thought time would erase what I did, but it doesn't erase, it teaches. And I only understood what you tried to show me when I sat in front of a sewing machine." I smiled. "The machine has a beautiful way of teaching. It doesn't forgive mistakes, but it always gives you the chance to undo and start again." He nodded, eyes glistening. Then he lowered his gaze. "I came to give back the time I stole from you. I can't change what happened, but I want to be here now, even if it's just from afar." Those words struck me with tenderness, because sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come in a speech, it comes in a gesture, in a look, in quiet presence. We sat in silence for a few minutes. He traced the edge of the table with his fingers. I held the mug in my hands. Then I said softly, "Time taught you, my son, and now it's teaching me too. We don't need to forget what happened to begin again. We just need to stitch together what's left." He smiled, and his eyes, tired but peaceful, finally looked free. Before leaving, he hugged me. A gentle, steady hug. No guilt, only gratitude. When he left, the studio was still for a moment. Then a soft breeze drifted in through the window, making the colorful fabrics sway. I looked at the new mug on the table and thought, time sews, and sometimes, the final stitch is the most beautiful of all. The workshop slept in silence. The lights were off. The air still carried the scent of fabric, and the echo of the women's laughter drifted softly through the walls. It was one of those calm nights when time itself seems to stop, as if the world, for a brief moment, were honoring the rest of someone who had fought too long. I sat alone at the table, a cup of tea beside me, and the old notebook I'd kept since the beginning. Its pages were yellowed, filled with crooked notes, stitching ideas, scattered phrases, but that night, I wasn't there to write another idea. I was there to say goodbye. I picked up my pen, took a deep breath before touching the paper, and wrote at the top of the page, "Letter to the woman I once was. Dear Nora, if you are reading this, it means you survived. And not only survived, you bloomed, even after they said you were dry. I remember the day you cried, holding that broken mug in your hands. The humiliation, the shame, the loneliness. You thought that would be the end. But it wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new seam, sewn with threads you didn't even know you had. You blamed yourself for loving too much, forgiving too much, waiting too long. But let me tell you now, that was never weakness. It was courage. The courage to stay kind in a world that gave you cruelty in return. Today, the workshop is full of color. The voices that echo here belong to women who learned from you how to stand tall again. And every stitch they make carries a piece of your story, a memory transformed into strength. You, who were once laughed at in public, are now remembered with respect. But what matters most is that you respect yourself. You look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back. And that, my dear, is the greatest victory of all. I know you still miss things. You miss your mother, the little boy your son once was, the days when you believed love was enough. But now you understand, true love doesn't cage you. It sets you free, and you are free. You've learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's looking at the wound and saying, you existed, but you don't rule me anymore. You've learned that being a mother is more than raising. It's inspiring. And that being a woman is more than resisting. It's transforming. So, Nora, when the world tries to remind you of your old pain, answer it with the hum of the sewing machines. Each stitch is proof that you took what was left and turned it into art. You took humiliation and stitched it into hope. You took abandonment and stitched it into home. You took silence and stitched it into voice. And if you ever doubt again, remember this: the ground they tried to take from you became your foundation. And the tears that wet your face became the light that guides you now. With love and gratitude, from the woman you became, Nora. I closed the notebook slowly. The soft sound of the pen falling on the table echoed gently through the room. Outside, the wind moved the curtains, and the moonlight slipped through the windows, lighting up the sign on the wall, House of Free Hands. I smiled, because I finally understood that I didn't need anything more, not applause, not recognition. I already had what I'd been searching for all along, peace. And in that silence, full of meaning, I realized the woman who was once a joke had become a story. Not because she won, but because she kept going. The day of the tribute arrived, the way beautiful days often do, without warning, with the sun lighting up the windows, little by little. The whole neighborhood seemed to breathe differently. The women from the studio were excited, laughing, arranging fabrics, hanging flowers on the door. Lucy made me sit down to fix my hair. You have to shine today, Mrs. Nora, she said, laughing. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Never, in my wildest dreams, did I imagine that one day, the same woman who had been humiliated in front of a camera would be called an example out loud. But life, life has a beautiful sense of humor when it finally comes full circle. The square was full. A small stage had been set up. Children ran around. Neighbors held flowers. In the center, a plaque stood covered by a white cloth. When they called my name, the sound of applause seemed to come from far away. I walked up slowly, my heart beating in rhythm with my memories. Each step felt like another stitch sewn into time. I took the microphone and drew a deep breath. I looked out at the crowd and thought of everything I had been: mother, wife, joke, silence, restart. Then I spoke, my voice steady but gentle. Today isn't about me. It's about all the women who were once invisible and decided to exist again. About everyone who was mocked, forgotten, discarded, and still stood up to go on. I'm just one of them. The audience grew quiet. A soft breeze lifted the white cloth covering the plaque. I smiled and continued. One day, I cried because I was given a simple mug. Today, I cry because I finally understand what it meant. That value isn't in the gift, but in the hands that hold it with love. The applause came then, long, warm, alive. And it was in that moment, as I looked out over the crowd, that I saw him. At the back, quiet, still, my son. No suit this time. Just a light shirt, simple. He held something in his hands, a small bouquet of wildflowers. Our eyes met for a second that felt like a lifetime. Neither of us smiled, but the silence between us said everything words never could. When the ceremony ended, he waited until everyone had left. I stayed there, still on the stage, as the wind carried away the colored papers from the celebration. He walked toward me slowly, his eyes wet. "It was beautiful, Mom." "It was true," I replied. He nodded and held out the flowers. "I don't know if it's too late to say thank you." I took the bouquet gently, my fingers brushing his for a moment. "Time always gives us another chance, son. It doesn't erase, it mends." We stood there, looking at each other. No apologies, no speeches, just presence. And sometimes, presence is the whole forgiveness. Before leaving, he hugged me. A long, warm hug, full of everything that had been missing in all those years. And I realized that time had done what anger never could. It had healed. When he stepped back, he smiled faintly. "Now I understand why everyone calls you Donna Nora, because you belong to everyone." I smiled back. "I belong to whatever I built with love. The rest, the wind carried away." He waved goodbye, and I watched him disappear down the sunlit street. There was no bitterness left, no weight, only the sound of the wind and the soft echo of something that, at last, was at peace. I stood there alone for a moment. Then I looked at the cloth covering the plaque and, with steady hands, pulled it away. In golden letters, it read, "Here, a wounded woman stitched her own destiny." I ran my fingers over the cold metal, tenderly, closed my eyes, and gave thanks for what I lost, for what I gained, for what I became. Time went on, and with it, the rush went away. These days, I still wake up early, but not to hurry. I wake to feel the smell of coffee, to hear the first voices on the street, the hum of the sewing machine that Lucy now runs at the studio. The house of free hands isn't mine anymore, it belongs to all of us, and maybe that's the most beautiful part, knowing that what we create with heart keeps living, even after our hands have earned their rest. Sometimes I walk slowly to the workshop. The same old gate is now covered with flowers. The women have painted hearts on the walls, and inside each one there's a phrase, a memory, a promise. On the table in the corner sits the white mug my son once brought me. I use it every day, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude. The expensive watch, I never saw it again. And to be honest, I never wanted to, because I learned that time isn't measured in ticking hands, it's measured in courage. And if courage is the measure, then I've lived an eternity. The neighborhood has changed. New faces, new houses, new voices. Sometimes, young women I've never met knock at the gate and ask, "Is this the workshop for strong women?" I smile and say, "It is. But come in slowly, strength can be gentle too." They laugh, and the cycle begins again. With every new student, I see a bit of myself in the curious eyes, in the trembling hands, in the hunger to be more. And I think maybe destiny made me go through everything just so I could understand this. No one stitches a new life without first knowing what it means to be torn. Sometimes I sit alone and reread the letter I wrote to the woman I once was, not to feel sad, but to give thanks, because it was her, the hurt, ashamed, forgotten Nora, who cleared the path so that I could exist now. Without her, I would never have learned to turn pain into raw material, or humiliation into art. And if someone asked me today what it means to win, I'd say, winning is staying kind even after the world has hurt you. It's looking back without hate. It's finding peace without needing to prove anything to anyone. Sometimes the wind drifts through the workshop windows and makes the fabrics dance. I close my eyes and hear the steady rhythm of the sewing machine, almost like a heartbeat. And I think maybe it's life whispering to me, "There's still thread, there's still story." And I smile. Because I understand now, I never really stopped sewing. I just changed the fabric. Today, I sew good days. I sew laughter. I sew new beginnings. And if someone asks who I am, I'll say, I'm Nora. I was humiliated in public, and I was reborn in public. Once, they gave me a mug to make me feel small, and with it, I learned how to hold the world. And now that I've shared my story, I want to hear from you. Did I go too far, or did I finally stand up for myself? Tell me what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you